Ever had dinner with one of your exes? How about six? It sounds like a complete nightmare, especially for them. But that's exactly what King Henry VIII did when he married and divorced his six wives. Some of the wives were beloved, whilst others were not so lucky. But one thing's for sure, Henry VIII's wives have definitely left their mark in history. In this article, you'll get to know the names and fates of Henry VIII's wives. We'll take an in-depth look at each wife and their relationship with the King of England. So sit back, relax, and let's get to know these remarkable women. Kathryn of Aragon, the Spanish queen. Henry's eighth first wife was the Spanish princess, Kathryn of Aragon. The young queen arrived in England full of hope and anticipation, expecting a blissful marriage with her handsome betrothed. But their union was doomed from the start. Despite bearing a daughter, Henry was desperate for a male heir and began looking elsewhere for a wife. Sadly, after years of valiant resistance, Katherine was divorced and replaced by Anne Boleyn in 1533. She died at Kimbolton Castle 3 years later and is now remembered as one of England's greatest female figures, loyal, pious, and proud. Anne Boleyn. Execution and legacy. Anne Boleyn was Henry VIII's second wife and arguably the most famous for her role in the upheaval of the English Church. She was famously executed on trumped-up charges of treason and adultery. Anne's fate changed the course of history, signifying a break in England from Catholicism to Protestantism. Anne Boleyn was highly educated and competent in several languages. Her influence was so great that she is often credited with bringing Renaissance style to England, as well as its flirtation with humanist ideas such as science, mathematics, and literature. Her influence even extended beyond that, as her daughter Elizabeth was one of the longest ruling monarchs in British history. Today, Anne Boleyn is seen as a feminist icon who has inspired books, films, and television shows about her life as well as her legacy. But whatever her tragic end may have been, there's no denying that she left an indelible mark on history. Jane Seymour, royal wife and queen consort. Jane Seymour was Henry VIII's third wife and the only one to become queen consort of England. She began her courtship with Henry VIII in the spring of 1536 after his previous wife Anne Boleyn was executed. Jane married Henry VIII 10 days after Anne's death and gave birth to their son Edward in 1537. Jane's fate. As a reward for her loyalty and giving Henry an heir, Jane was honored with a lavish coronation ceremony in 1536. Sadly, however, it wasn't meant to last. Jane died shortly after giving birth to Edward from complications of childbirth. Her death left the king devastated, and he was so grief-stricken that he had her buried as royalty in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Jane Seymour is arguably remembered for being the only queen consort of England to provide Henry VIII with a legitimate son and receive a coronation ceremony during his lifetime. Despite her short reign as queen consort, she left a lasting impression on history, something she is remembered fondly for today. Anne of Cleves and the failed marriage. Anne of Cleves was the fourth of Henry's marriages, and it did not last long. She was a German princess, and this marriage was meant to help cement relationships between England and Germany. As you can imagine, things didn't go well. The issue was that Henry was expecting his new wife to look a certain way from the paintings he had seen, and he was not pleased with her when they met in person. He could not stand the sight of her, reportedly calling her his Flanders mare. This led to their marriage being annulled quickly. Henry granted Anne money, lands, and other items from his court as part of their separation agreement in order to make up for his mistreatment. Eventually, the two became good friends after their failed marriage. Anne remained at court until Henry's death in 1547. Katherine Howard, the queen who lost her head. Henry VIII's fifth and shortest-lived wife was Katherine Howard. She was young, beautiful, and a good dancer. But she couldn't keep Henry's affections for long. In power for less than 2 years, her fall from grace was swift and sudden. After rumors spread about Catherine's infidelities, Henry had her arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. She was executed for treason on February 13, 1542, at the Tower Green. Katherine's story is tragic, but also a reminder of how fickle royal favor can be. After all, in the same year that Katherine stepped into the spotlight as Queen Consort, Anne Boleyn, Henry's former wife, was convicted of adultery and treason and executed in 1536. The moral of the story: royalty can make or break your life, so it's important to always remain vigilant and stay on their good sides if you want to escape their wrath. Kathryn Parr, the Widow Queen. Kathryn Parr, the sixth and final wife of King Henry VIII, was a keen scholar and the only of his wives to survive him. Born in 1512 to Sir Thomas Parr and Maud Green, she had three siblings: Anne, later Baroness, then April 1529 Countess of Pembroke; William, later Baron Parr, then Earl of Essex; and Katherine, later Duchess of Suffolk. And enjoyed an affluent upbringing. Katherine first married Edward Burrough in 1529 at the age of 17. However, their marriage only lasted 3 years as Edward died shortly after in 1532. In her 20s, Katherine remarried two more husbands: John Neville Lord Latimer and Thomas Seymour, brother to Jane Seymour, which both ended with his death in 1543. Having caught the eye of King Henry VIII during a visit to court in 1545, Katherine married him later that year. She was charged with taking care of his children with Anne Boleyn, Mary Tudor, the future Queen Mary I, and Elizabeth Tudor, the future Queen Elizabeth I. During this time, Katherine took on a central role at court. For instance, she wrote many books on religious topics which were published during this period. During her time as Queen Consort, she established herself as a woman who defended religious reformers despite Henry's battles against Protestantism. Katherine was known for having an amicable relationship with all her stepchildren. Mary was said to have deeply respected Katherine, while Elizabeth regarded her as a loving mother figure. After Queen Katherine's death due to puerperal fever following childbirth in 1548, Henry VIII never remarried and died 2 years later in January 15. Conclusion. In conclusion, Henry VIII's 6 wives are some of the most famous women of their era. Each of them experienced a different fate, from beheadings to annulments. Even though they lived hundreds of years ago, the stories of Henry VIII and his wives live on and provide us insight into the world of 16th century England. Their stories remind us of the power of love, loyalty, and resilience, and how even in the face of drastic changes and difficult decisions, individuals can create a legacy. No matter how one feels about Henry VIII's choices and his wives' respective fates, they remain a powerful part of royal history to this day.